Welcome to the News Hour. Russia and Ukraine have signed a deal to reopen Ukrainian ports on the Black Sea for grain exports, raising hopes of easing the global food crisis. The ceremony in Istanbul was overseen by the UN Secretary-General and the Turkish president, who brokered the agreement. Grain shipments have been stuck in Ukraine since the start of the Russian invasion in February, and that's led to a rise in global food prices.
This is an agreement for the world. It will bring relief for developing countries on the edge of bankruptcy and the most vulnerable people on the edge of famine. And it will help stabilize global food prices, which were already at record levels even before the war, a true nightmare for developing countries. Specifically, the initiative we just signed opens up paths for significant volumes of commercial food exports from three key Ukrainian ports in the Black Sea: Odessa, Chebanovsk and Yuzhny.
İstanbul'da atmakta olduğumuz bu müşterek
This joint step we are taking in Istanbul, together with Russia and Ukraine, will be a new turning point that will revive the hopes for peace. This is my sincere hope. Whatever direction the developments on the field will take, the war will finally end on the negotiating table. This friendly and peaceful atmosphere that we have established will be to the benefit of humanity, and this will transform into steps aimed at ending the war.
Now, in a few moments, we'll be speaking to our diplomatic editor, James Bays, who's at the United Nations in New York. But first, let's get reaction out of Ukraine with Alan Fisher, who's in Kyiv. And, of course, we will get him shortly. We had a slight technical problem there. Let's cross over to James Bays, who's our diplomatic editor in New York. We'll get to Alan, I'm sure, shortly, James. But let's just begin with the fact that what's happened, it has been very quick in the last, hour or so. Markets normally react very quickly, and I know you're our diplomatic editor, but can you be our economic editor too, and just tell us, have they reacted as quickly as we might have imagined where you are in New York?
I'm afraid so. I don't have knowledge of the markets. I've just come out of a diplomatic briefing, but certainly the briefing I had was with the US ambassador who is in charge of sanctions. And part of this deal is trying to get Russian grain and fertilizer. This is the bit that favours Russia. Get Russian grain and fertilizer back on global markets, because he's making the point that they were never subject to sanctions and that no one should have been stopping the flow of those. Now, he also told me that he believes that with regard to shipping companies and to insurance companies, they should see no problem now now that there is this deal, and that they should be able to comply with this deal and not be wary. But of course they are going to be wary, because this deal involves ships travelling through mined waters, we're told through channels that have been clearly identified. So I think that is one of the tests of this, how the shipping market, how the insurance market reacts, and I think there will be a test of implementation in the coming weeks to see if this goes ahead. It's not going to happen straight away. You're not going to see a ship that is sailing in the next couple of days. I think we're talking a couple of weeks at the earliest for the first ship of grain. And remember that we're talking about 22 million tons of grain backlog that has formed in Ukraine and caused much of the global food crisis. It's going to take some time to get all of that grain out. Experts estimate probably about 4 months to get all of that grain out to global markets. So if you thought that it was going to alleviate the global food crisis, this is a major breakthrough, but nothing's going to happen overnight here.
James, you've been talking behind the scenes to diplomats for many weeks now about this conflict in Ukraine. How delicate have the negotiations been to get to this phase? Because we know that from actually signing an agreement in Istanbul over the next few weeks until they can get those first ships out, as you say, with grain on them, anything can happen.
Oh, absolutely. It remains a very delicate situation, and it has been throughout. I can tell you that they were talking about this signing ceremony weeks ago, the first time I heard a potential date for it taking place. And it's been pushed back and pushed back. Lots of meetings. I think one of the final meetings took place earlier this week, and that's when President Erdogan of Turkey, who along with the UN has been the main broker of this deal, met with President Putin. They were having a summit with the Iranian president in Tehran Iran, on the sidelines of that, they had a meeting. That was an important meeting. I think some will be asking the important question, why has Russia agreed to this deal now? What is Russia's view on this, and does this suggest in any way that Russia is changing its overall calculations with regard to the Ukrainian war? Certainly, the diplomats that I've canvassed on this believe that Russia is getting too much flack for the global food crisis and believes that it should be on the right side of the argument there, but most of them do not believe, and even the Secretary General, when I asked him this a week ago in an open press briefing, they don't believe this is necessarily now going to translate to peace in Ukraine. This is a very specific but very important deal, but unlikely to affect the ongoing war in the country.
James Bayes, our diplomatic editor. Thanks, James, for the update. Let's cross over to Alan Fisher now, who we can actually get in touch with now in Kyiv. Alan, as James said, a very delicate situation that is only specific, the agreement that's been signed today, to grain shipments. I mean, the Ukrainians themselves have made it very clear, haven't they, to this point, that they're not signing a deal with Russia, they're signing a deal with the UN. End of.
You've heard the Secretary General, and he's talking in optimistic terms, saying this is ground for optimism, suggesting that somehow this could lead to more talks. That's not something that the Ukrainians are looking at. As far as they're concerned, this is one and done for the time being. They see this as a deal that they have signed with the United Nations and with Turkey, and certainly not with Russia. And we heard from a senior advisor to the presidential office on Twitter just in the last couple of hours saying, look, it's very clear there will be no Russian vessels in Ukrainian territorial waters under this deal. The Ukrainians here are very clear that they see the Russians as an aggressor nation, and we know that they're approaching the ICC, the International Criminal Court, to set up a whole new investigation with the intention of charging senior Russian leadership with the crime of being an aggressor nation. They also say there will be no Russian inspectors in any of the 3 Ukrainian ports that are under their control. If there are to be any searches of ships, that won't happen in Ukrainian waters. That will happen in Turkish territorial waters. So they are making this absolutely clear. Look, we have signed this deal, but we will respond to any provocation from the Russians with military action immediately. On late Thursday here in Kyiv, diplomats were saying, look, this isn't a done deal yet, even though the United Nations and Turkey were saying the wording has been agreed. President Zelensky hinted that there was agreement when he made his usual address late on Thursday night by saying there was going to be an agreement in Turkey that would help the country. And so they're not seeing this as a pathway to peace talks, not least because in the last 24 hours or so, Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, has said that the Russian territorial intention is not just the Donbass region, but they see extending it to Kyiv and also Zaporizhia, which is much more than they had said. And President Zelensky has said that they intend to inflict a great deal of damage to the Russians in the coming weeks. So there may be optimism that they've managed to get the 2 sides to sign an agreement, not with each other, but with third parties. But the prospect of this leading to some sort of agreement in the near future that will end the war, well, that's simply not going to happen.
Alan Fisher in Kyiv, thanks very much.